Senator from Georgia.
Mr. President, I ask that the quorum call be terminated and that I be allowed to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, later on this afternoon, the Senate Intelligence Committee is going to vote out the nomination of Matt Olsen to be the next director of the National Counterterrorism Center. And I rise today in support of the nomination of Matthew Olsen to be the next director of NCTC. Following the September 11 terrorist attacks, we did a lot of self-examination as a government and, putting it simply, realized that pieces of intelligence that should have been connected had not been, or, in other words, the dots had not been connected. Congress understood that we could not afford another lapse like 9/11, so it created the National Counterterrorism Center to analyze and integrate counterterrorism information across the government. While we have not suffered another 9/11, our record is not perfect. From the Christmas Day bombing attempt to Fort Hood, Times Square, and the New York subway plot, the threats to our homeland are very real. At the same time, changing political landscapes and challenges from adverse nations require constant attention. In this environment, it is essential for NCTC to perform its mission beyond reproach. After the Christmas Day bombing, or the near bombing, aboard Flight 253, the Senate Intelligence Committee conducted a review to determine where the Intelligence Committee could have done a better job of anticipating this attempted attack. Unfortunately, the committee's review showed that NCTC had not lived up to its statutory responsibilities. The then Director, Mike Leiter, to his credit, took criticism in a very positive way and made the right kinds of changes at NCTC to move us in the right direction. While I am encouraged by the progress NCTC has made since then to repair those shortcomings, there is much work that still needs to be done. Matt Olsen, I believe, has the right background to take the helm of this important intelligence center at this very critical point in our history. He is no stranger either to the Senate Intelligence Committee or to the serious threats that face our nation. Members and staff have worked with him on several high-profile issues over the last few years. As a Deputy Assistant Attorney General for the National Security Division, he was responsible for ensuring that our intelligence professionals had all the legal authority they needed from the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court in order to continue this country safe. Let me just say that this was no easy task, and the stakes were high, especially given the political wrangling over FISA and the USA Patriot Act in recent years. Matt spent countless hours briefing our staff and other committees on many highly sensitive FISA issues. In large part because of his willingness to stick to the facts and not play political games, he has earned the respect of members on both sides of the political aisle. For the last year, Matt has served in a very professional way as a general counsel for the National Security Agency, a position that has also put him in close contact, again, with the intelligence committees. General Keith Alexander, who heads up NSA, provided a letter of support for Matt's nomination, and I have also spoken personally with General Alexander about Matt. I have a great deal of respect for the General, and it speaks volumes to me that he has such high unequivocal praise for Matt, both as a leader as well as a person. Matt's other job, not an enviable one, which brought him in close contact with the committee, was his service as the Executive Director of the Guantanamo Review Task Force. I have had numerous conversations with Matt about some of the recommendations made by the task force on transferring what I believe continue to be potentially dangerous detainees. I appreciate that the task force was following a deadline set by executive order to close Guantanamo Bay, but I believe that we have accepted too great a risk to our national security by transferring many of these detainees to other host countries. The recidivism rate continues to climb. It's today somewhere in the range of 26%. And we have no reason to expect that it will stop climbing anytime soon. Our first obligation must always be to ensure the safety of the American people, not to transfer dangerous detainees simply to meet an arbitrary political deadline. Of particular concern to me are the transfers of a number of Yemeni detainees during 2009, when the intelligence community was already warning about the dangerous security situation in Yemen. Of course, we all know that al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula makes its home in Yemen, and that several former Gitmo detainees now hold high positions in AQAP. AQAP was directly responsible for the Christmas Day bombing attempt, and their efforts will continue to inflict harm on our nation, their efforts to harm our nation will continue. Matt acknowledges the difficulties presented by the Yemeni transfers, and he has acknowledged that the task force did not get every recommendation right, just as the previous administration did not get every recommendation right. He also shares my personal view that Guantanamo Bay should remain open so that we are not transferring any more detainees as the recidivism rate continues to grow. I appreciate the many conversations and briefings he has had with my staff on those transfer issues. I appreciate his willingness to continue to discuss these issues and the need for a long-term detention policy, even after taking on his new position as NCTC Director. Ironically, in his new position, he will be responsible for tracking former detainees, including detainees whose transfer the task force may have recommended, who slipped into their old ways before they can strike us again. It was in this capacity that Matt had an issue with a colleague, and I have vetted this with Matt and with most of those who were in the room on the occasion when the issue arose. While better judgment could have been used, the issue is now behind us. And I have impressed upon Matt that if he is confirmed as a director of NCTC, his credibility must be unquestionable. He has confirmed to me that he will always communicate with members of Congress fully and openly without political censorship. He also is committed to be totally open and have an ongoing dialogue with members of the respective House and Senate Intelligence Committees. My good friend, Senator Kent Conrad, who is actually the home senator for Matt since he's originally from North Dakota, spoke extensively about Matt's reputation and commitment to public service during his confirmation hearing. Many intelligence professionals on both sides of the political lines wrote letters of recommendation on Matt's behalf. I believe Matt when he tells me that he is committed to working closely with Congress and the intelligence committees to do the job needed to keep this country safe. I'll be supporting his nomination when it comes to the floor, and I look forward to working with him. With that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. President.
Senator from North Dakota.
I ask further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I have two unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders. I ask unanimous consent these requests be agreed to and these requests be printed in the record.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise today to discuss the agreement that has been reached between the leaders in the Senate and the House, Republicans and Democrats, and the President of the United States with respect to an extension of the debt limit and certain deficit reduction steps to be taken in conjunction with that action. Mr. President, I want to remind colleagues that if we fail to act, most economists believe we would face an interest rate spike. And for every 1 percentage point increase in interest rates, we would add $1.3 trillion to deficits and debt over 10 years. Mr. President, if there was only a 200 basis point increase, that would wipe out all of the deficit reduction that is in this package. So colleagues need to keep in mind the consequences of our actions and how critically important it is to prevent that interest rate spike. In addition, David Beers, Standard & Poor's global head of sovereign ratings, said in an interview on CNBC on July 26th the following: to avoid a U.S. credit rating downgrade, the S&P wants to see bipartisan debt reduction effort. Mr. President, he said specifically, we will measure this matter on a number of parameters. One is it credible? And credibility, among other things, means to us that there has to be some buy-in across the political divide, across both parties, because politics can and will change going forward. And if there's ownership by both sides of the program, then that would give us more confidence. It's not just about the number, it's about the all-in intent. Mr. President, however imperfect this agreement is, and it is imperfect, after all, it is a work of the hands of man. We are all imperfect. But it is critically important. It is important to demonstrate that we can work together to achieve a result. Mr. President, this package contains these elements. First, it prevents a default. It saves the nation from an immediate economic crisis. It creates a process to allow debt ceiling increase to 2013. So we don't have to reenact this entire episode in just a matter of months. It provides a $900 billion down payment on deficit reduction that is enforced with 10 years of spending caps. It creates a joint select committee of Congress on deficit reduction, tasked with finding additional $1.5 trillion in savings, and to bring us a report before Thanksgiving. This select committee has a goal of $1.5 trillion in savings as a floor. It is not a ceiling. This committee could come back to us with an even more ambitious, more bold proposal to get our fiscal affairs in order. Mr. President, let us hope that it be so. It also, the overall package that is before us or about to be before us requires a vote on a balanced budget amendment. The debt ceiling increase is not contingent on its passage, but there is a requirement to give colleagues in both chambers an opportunity to vote. It also, the package before us, protects Pell Grants from deep near-term cuts, and I think most of us understand how important Pell Grants are to providing opportunity to young, talented people all across America to improve themselves through higher education. And Mr. President, I was raised by my grandparents. My grandmother was a school teacher. We called her Little Chief because she was only 5 feet tall, but she commanded respect. And she commanded respect because she had character. And she told people in our family There are three priorities in this household. Number one is education. Number two is education. Number three is education. And we got the message. I can remember fondly her telling us over and over, what you put in your head, no one can take away. They can take your property. They can take your wealth. One thing nobody can take from you is what you've done to improve your mind. That ought to be something that's taught in every household in our country because it is central to America continuing to be a world leader. Mr. President, the proposal that will be before us also creates a joint select committee on deficit reduction. As I've indicated, they have a goal of finding an additional $1.5 trillion in savings, but they're not limited to that level of savings. They could do more. It is bipartisan and bicameral, 12 members, 6 Democrats, 6 Republicans. Congress is to have a report by Thanksgiving on their work. No amendments are allowed, and a simple majority vote to pass in the Senate and the House. Mr. President, this closely follows the recommendation of Senator Gregg and I from 5 years ago to create a commission empowered to bring to a vote in the Senate and the House a plan to get our debt under control and to do it so that you wouldn't have the endless process that our current situation requires. Mr. President, the idea was to create a BRAC-like system so that a proposal could come before the Senate, could come before the House to get our debt down. It is modeled in many ways after the reconciliation process that was designed for deficit reduction. It only requires a simple majority vote. There is a fail-safe. If this committee fails to produce a result, the fail-safe is across-the-board cuts in defense and non-defense spending with exemptions for Social Security, veterans, low-income people, and it limits the Medicare reductions to 2%. Mr. President, I would prefer that the Medicare reduction not be there because there's no revenue that's assured in this plan. But we do have to have a fail-safe. We do have to have some assurance that the savings are actually realized. And this mechanism does that. I think all of us know that our current status finds us borrowing 40 cents of every dollar that we spend. In fact, we are in a condition in which the United States is borrowing more than we have ever borrowed before as a share of our national income. And the Congressional Budget Office, nonpartisan, has told us that the long-term outlook is even more sobering, that we have a debt held by the public that is about 70% now. We're right here, debt held by the public about 70%. Our gross debt is actually approaching 100%. But our publicly held debt, that is debt held by the public, not counting what we owe to trust funds like Social Security, is about 70%. But look where we're headed if we stay on our current course. The Congressional Budget Office tells us by 2037, our publicly held debt will be 200% of our gross domestic product if we fail to act. And how did we get in this circumstance? Well, Mr. President, this says it very clearly and very well. The red line is the spending line of the United States. The green line is the revenue line, going back 60 years. And what we can see is the red line, the spending line, is the highest it's ever been. 24% of gross domestic product, federal spending. The revenue line is the lowest it's ever been in that period, the lowest it's been in 60 years. Some of our friends say on the other side, we just have a spending problem. They've got it half right. We do have a spending problem. Spending is almost the highest it's been in 60 years. But you know what? We've also got a revenue problem, because revenue is the lowest it's been in 60 years as a share of our national income. That's a fact. So, Mr. President, we've got to work both sides of this equation. If we go back and reconstruct how did we get in this ditch, a story in May 1st of 2011 in the Washington Post, I think, is instructive. Here's what they found. The biggest culprit by far has been an erosion of tax revenue triggered largely by 2 recessions and multiple rounds of tax cuts. Together, the economy and tax bills enacted under former President George W. Bush and to a lesser extent by President Obama wiped out $6.3 trillion in anticipated revenue. That's nearly half of the $12.7 trillion swing from projected surpluses to real debt. Federal tax collections now stand at their lowest level as a percentage of the economy in 60 years, buttressing and confirming the point I've just made. In addition, if one examines our history going back to 1969 and look at the 5 times that we have balanced the budget, in each of those times, revenue was almost 20% of GDP. Right now, remember what I just said? Revenue is 14.5% of GDP. The 5 times since 1969 we balanced the budget, revenue was 19.7% of GDP in 69. In 1998, it was 19.9. In 1999, it was 19.8. In 2000, it was 20.6. In 2001, it was 19.5. By the way, all of these budgets, these last 4, were the responsibility of Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton not only balanced the budget, he stopped using Social Security funds to finance other government operations. And he did it with the longest period of uninterrupted growth in our nation's history and created 23 million jobs. The Clinton administration record on deficits, on debt, on economic growth and job creation is the best by far of all modern presidents. Mr. President, facts are stubborn things. Now, we have a tax code today that is riddled with tax expenditures. Riddled with tax expenditures. We are losing to the Treasury $1.1 trillion a year to tax expenditures. Tax preferences, tax loophole, tax deductions, tax exclusions. And guess who gets most of the benefit? 26% of the benefit goes to the top 1% of those tax expenditures, those tax loopholes, those tax preferences. Here is one of the most conservative economists in America, Martin Feldstein, professor of economics at Harvard, chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Reagan. This is what he said about tax expenditures on July 20th of last year. Cutting tax expenditures, and I quote, Martin Feldstein, cutting tax expenditures is really the best way to reduce government spending. Eliminating tax expenditures does not increase marginal tax rates or reduce the reward for saving, investment, or risk-taking. It would also increase overall economic efficiency by removing incentives that distort private spending decisions and eliminating or consolidating the large number of overlapping tax-based subsidies would also greatly simplify tax filing. In short, cutting tax expenditures is not at all like other ways of raising revenue. Mr. President, that is precisely why the Fiscal Commission and the Group of 6, both groups that I was proud to participate in, chose the reduction of tax expenditures as one way of reforming the tax system, improving the competitive position of the United States, and raising revenue to help reduce this debt threat. Mr. President, anybody that wonders about what's happening with respect to loopholes, exclusions, deductions, preferences in the tax code, you don't have to go any further than this picture that I've shown many times. This little 5-story building, Udland House, down in the Cayman Islands claims to be the home of 18,857 companies. What an amazing building that is. This little building, the home to 18,000 companies. They all say they're doing business out of this building. Really? Anybody believe that? They're not doing business out of that building. They're doing monkey business. And the monkey business they're doing is to avoid paying the taxes all the rest of us pay, because Cayman Islands is a tax haven. They don't impose taxes on these companies. So guess what these companies do? They file returns that show miraculously their profits of all their operations across the United States. Their profits don't show up in the United States. They show up in this little 5-story building down in the Cayman Islands. They say that's where the profits are being realized, and what a blessing that is, because the Cayman Islands doesn't impose any taxes on the profits that show up down in the subsidiaries of the companies who are doing business all over the world. Mr. President, anybody that wonders that this is costing all the rest of us huge amounts of money, here's what our Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations found in a report in 2007. Experts have estimated the total loss to the Treasury from offshore tax evasion alone approaches $100 billion a year. $100 billion a year. If you have any doubt about this, go home and Google tax havens. See what you find. I think you'll be quite startled by what you see. Those losses of $100 billion a year include $40 to $70 billion from individuals, another $30 billion from corporations engaging in offshore tax evasion, abusive tax shelters, and add tens of billions of dollars more. Mr. President, my family and I, we pay what we owe. The vast majority of people in this country pay what they owe. We got a few people, unfortunately it's a growing number, and they tend to be people with much greater resources, are not paying what they owe. We shouldn't permit it. That should come to a screeching halt. Mr. President, the bipartisan groups proposing comprehensive and balanced plans with spending cuts and revenues include the Fiscal Commission, the Bipartisan Policy Center, and the Group of Six. These are the only bipartisan plans that have come from anywhere, and all of them recommended a balance between spending cuts and revenue. Almost all of them focused on reducing tax expenditures, the loopholes, the exclusions, the preferences, the tax havens, in order to raise revenue, to reduce rates, to make America more competitive, but also to raise additional revenue to dump this debt. And Mr. President, the other day there was a spirited debate on the floor between the senior senator from Arizona and the senior senator from Illinois. I arrived here at the end of that debate, didn't have a chance to participate. There were a number of assertions made there by my friend Senator McCain, and I just want to set the record straight. If we look at the records of Reagan, Bush 41, Bush 43, and Clinton with respect to deficits, the record is very clear. Here it is. During the Reagan administration, deficits exploded. And you can see on the graph, deficits that averaged about $200 billion a year. During the first Bush administration, the deficits actually got worse and ended up still in the range of $200 billion a year. President Clinton inherited deficits of $200 billion a year, but you can see by the last 4 years of his administration, he was in the black. The budgets were balanced, and for I think 2 or 3 of those years, he actually stopped using Social Security money to fund government operations. So, and then of course we see what happened in the second Bush administration. Deficits absolutely exploded. absolutely exploded. The second Bush administration was by far the worst on record of deficits and debt of any of these administrations. But by far the best was the Clinton administration. We can look at it a different way. This chart shows in dollar terms what happened to the debt. You can see the Reagan administration, the debt well more than doubled. The Bush administration took it up much further. The Clinton administration actually started bringing down the debt. He actually was paying off debt during the Clinton administration. And then we saw what happened in the second Bush administration. The debt absolutely skyrocketed, going up well over 2.5 times. Mr. President, when we then look at the record of economic growth under those different presidents, it's very interesting. Reagan, who more than doubled the debt, had a pretty good record of economic growth, 3.5%. Bush 1, who ran the debt up even further, pretty paltry record, 2.1% economic growth. Clinton, who actually paid down debt, had the best record of economic growth, 3.8% on average. Bush 2, who put in place the massive tax cuts that ballooned the deficits and the debt, had the worst record of economic growth, averaging 1.6%. Well, let's connect the dots. Let's connect the dots. Big increase in debt during the Reagan administration, but pretty good economic growth. He took number 2 spot. Bush 1, massive increase in deficits and debt, economic growth faltered. Clinton administration has by far the best record on deficits and debt, also the best record on economic growth. And then Bush 2, who had huge tax cuts, never offset by an adjustment, as Reagan did, had the worst record of economic growth. And finally, on job creation, again, Reagan administration, 16 million jobs were created, quite a strong record of job creation during his 8 years. First Bush administration, only 3 million jobs created. The Clinton administration, by far the winner on the jobs derby. 23 million jobs created, and he had the best record of deficit and debt reduction and the best record on economic growth. And you know what? He raised taxes and cut spending. Wow. Our friends on the other side said when President Clinton raised taxes and cut spending that it would crater the economy. I was here. I heard the majority leader on that side say that that proposal would crater the economy. And Republicans all repeated that line all across America. The Clinton plan to get the deficits and debt down by raising revenue and cutting spending, they all said would crater the economy. They were wrong. They were wrong. Then it came time for the Bush administration, and he had massive tax cuts, and they all said that would be a huge job creator and fire up the engines of economic growth. They were wrong again. They were wrong again. The record is clear. Look at the difference here. 16 million jobs created under Reagan, 3 million under Bush 1, 23 million under Clinton, 3 million under Bush 2. And Clinton had the biggest reductions in deficit and debt by far of any of them. He had the best economic growth. He had the best job creation. And second Bush administration comes and they say, big tax cuts, that's going to fire up economic growth, that's going to fire up job creation. They were wrong. When Clinton had a proposal to raise revenue and cut spending, they said it would crater the economy, and yet Clinton had the best record on economic growth, the best record on job creation. They were wrong again. During the second Bush administration, at the end, has everybody forgotten? We were on the brink of financial collapse. I was called to a special meeting in this building with the Bush's administration's Secretary of Treasury, and I, along with other leaders of the House and the Senate, were told we were days away from a financial collapse. This idea that you can't raise revenue or it will kill jobs, you can't cut spending or it will kill jobs, has not proven to be right. In the real world, the Clinton administration raised revenue, cut spending to get our debt under control, and they had the strongest record of job creation, the strongest record of economic growth of any of the 4 presidents during that period, by far. I just say I wish I could have participated in that debate last night. I missed it, but I wanted to set the record straight. I thank the chair and yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from New Jersey.
Mr. President, I wanted to come to the floor to talk about the deal that the Senate will vote on at some time later tonight or tomorrow. Before I do, I want to say to my distinguished colleague from North Dakota, the chairman of the Budget Committee, as always, what an exceptional job he's done in laying out fact from fiction, the realities of the choices before us. And I only hope that the revenue possibilities that he clearly expressed exist as part of an equation to a solution could be invoked. But I'm concerned based upon what the other side says. We have a deal before us that is a result of a manufactured crisis. The debt limit has historically been raised as a matter of course by both Republican and Democrats, both sides, without conditions. Without conditions. Ronald Reagan did it 18 times without conditions. George W. Bush did it 7 times without conditions. But no, not this time. Not this time. For days, for weeks, this Congress has been held hostage by a radical few, a band of Tea Party tyrants who believe their opinions, their values, their view of the world, their vision of government must be America's vision. It is not. In their world, there is no room for reasonable compromise. There is no room for fair and balanced budget approaches, the kind of approaches to budgets that I and many on this side have worked for and voted for throughout our careers in Congress. I have voted for balance going in, and I was looking for balance in the final agreement, or the hope of balance that the American people have expressed themselves clearly they wanted to see. Spending cuts, but also ending those tax loopholes and creating revenue. I have voted for $2.4 trillion in cuts in the Reid Amendment with inclusion of a joint committee process. Senator Conrad was talking about that. That could include revenues, a balanced approach. I have supported increasing the debt limit in a responsible way, a balanced, responsible, fair approach that implements significant but responsible deductions. I voted in 2010 to establish the Bipartisan Task Force for Responsible Fiscal Action, the precursor to the Bowles-Simpson Commission, to review all aspects of the financial conditions of our government, including tax policy and entitlement spending. I voted to protect Social Security from being used to balance the budget when it hasn't contributed to our debt. I voted in favor of the prior amendment to reduce the budget deficit by at least $154 billion, with a balanced approach to cutting our deficits that included discretionary spending, entitlements, and revenues. I have supported budget enforcement measures like the statutory pay-go, to pay as you go when you come up with a new idea for spending or a tax break, to control both spending and revenues. I led the effort in this chamber to cut $21 billion in unwarranted big oil subsidies and supported saving almost $6 billion this year alone by cutting ethanol subsidies. and I have voted 5 times in the past to increase the debt limit in a responsible way. But this 11th hour deal, with so many strings attached that it has become a tangled web of conservative social values, is nothing more than a concession to the radical right of one party, and it flies in the face of our values as a nation. It would mean drastic and dramatic cuts to one side of the ledger, overwhelmingly from non-defense spending, and no balance, I repeat, no balance on the revenue side. I know that their suggestion is that the Commission can look at revenue. Yes, it can look at revenue. But that commission that is going to be appointed with an equal number of Republicans and Democrats and appointed by the leadership in both houses pretty much tells you where it's going to end up. Speaker Boehner has said he won't appoint anyone to the committee who would accept revenue as part of the mix. Senator McConnell has said there will be no new revenue. They get appointments to that commission. That's half of the commission. Even Gene Sperling, the President's economic advisor, said there will be no new revenues for the next 18 months, which is a clear reflection of what Speaker Boehner and Minority Leader McConnell have said. And since they won't accept revenue, except maybe in the context of tax reform, which the Joint Committee has said it can't do by the end of the year, which is when this commission is called upon by Thanksgiving to come forth and make a presentation, and we Democrats will have members on the commission who will be responsible and want to strike a deal, we will end up either having to accept the commission's spending cuts without revenue, leaving us with trillions of dollars in non-defense and entitlement cuts, or automatic sequestered cuts that are even more draconian. And does anyone really believe in this chamber that the Bush tax cuts for the top tier, the richest, the wealthiest people, millionaires and billionaires, which will expire in 2012, will be on the table in an election year, that the President will issue a veto threat for those tax cuts and make them the hallmark of his re-election campaign? I don't think so. I don't think so. While I know that if we go to the automatic sequestered cuts, that nearly $1 trillion of those automatic cuts will come supposedly from defense, what guarantees are there that we won't use the overseas contingency fund of $1 trillion to meet the defense side of the cuts? The very fund that Republicans in the budget passed in the House put in their budget and that virtually all of my Republican colleagues here in the Senate voted on. And they voted on it as cuts. What makes us think, if that isn't the case, what makes us think that supplemental emergency appropriations won't be offered on the defense side while war fighters are in the field, leaving us with no real defense cuts but a hard $1 trillion in cuts on domestic programs like education, student loans, health care, renewable energy, research and development, and the list goes on. And for those who suggest that this commission is, and the threat, the sword of those automatic cuts will make people act responsibly, what makes us think that the old paradigm, which I long for, that people will be responsible, will take place, given what we have seen, in which we have a manufactured crisis that has brought us on the verge to an economic crisis that is not only national but international in proportion? If people have been willing to bring us to that point, what makes us think that this negotiation as proposed by the legislation will work? They will continue to look for deeper and deeper cuts to those basic services we as a party and as a nation have fought for. We will spend the next year headed into the national decision-making that will take place next November, forced to debate deeper cuts, refight old battles, debate a balanced budget amendment, the Bush tax cuts, instead of talking about creating jobs, which is what Americans want to see again, and helping middle-class families who are struggling to make ends meet. But don't listen to me on that. Listen to Paul Krugman, a Nobel Prize-winning economist who wrote today that this deal is a disaster, his words, for the economy. He said, and I quote, "Start with the economics. We currently have a deeply depressed economy. We will almost certainly continue to have a depressed economy throughout next year. And we will probably have a depressed economy through 2013 as well, if not beyond. The worst thing you can do in these circumstances is to slash government spending, since that will depress the economy even further. Pay no attention to those who invoke the confidence fairy, claiming that tough action on the budget will reassure businesses and consumers, leading them to spend more. It doesn't work that way, a fact confirmed by many studies of the historical record." He goes on to say, "Indeed, slashing spending while the economy is depressed won't even help the budget situation much. It might well make it worse. On one side, interest rates on federal borrowing are currently very low, so spending cuts now will do little to reduce future interest costs. On the other side, making the economy weaker now will also hurt its long-run prospects, which will in turn reduce future revenue. So those demanding spending cuts now are like medieval doctors who treated the sick by bleeding them and thereby made them even sicker." And he goes on to say, "And then there are the reported terms of the deal which amount to an abject surrender. First, there will be big spending cuts with no increase in revenue. Then a panel will make recommendations for further deficit reduction, and if these recommendations aren't accepted, and as I described before, the possibility of getting revenue in that equation with the appointments being made by the authorities making them, saying they will appoint no one who will consider revenues, there will be therefore even more spending cuts." So that's a Nobel Prize economist. No, Mr. President, there is no balance in this agreement, no real compromise. It simply does not force shared sacrifice as the American people have demanded. Oil companies will make $146 billion in profits this year. The Big Five, they'll keep picking the pocket of American taxpayers with a ridiculous handout while they earn those billions in profits. Ethanol millionaires will be off the hook with this deal. There's no balance in this deal. There is no fairness. They're nothing but concessions to the radical right wing of the Republican Party that is holding the American economy hostage, a gun to its head, threatening to pull the trigger if they don't get their way. And yet, no one on the right seems to be happy. They want more. They believe they haven't gotten enough. Mr. President, when is enough enough? How far do we have to bend before we break? How much do we have to give of our values, our beliefs, our vision of America? How much do we have to give of the promises we have made as a nation to hardworking middle-class families struggling to make ends meet, struggling to pay the bills, the mortgage, pay for health care, tuition to put their children through college, and give them a chance at a better life? How about those whose lives would be shattered except for the government's protection? We are their voice. And I speak for them when I say this is not a fair deal, but it is the deal before us. What's fair is fair, but this plan is not fair to the American people. I cannot, in good conscience, support a plan where soldiers, seniors, students, and working families must endure trillions in cuts, while oil companies, billionaires, corporate jet owners are not asked to pay 1 cent toward shared sacrifice. The Republicans turned a relatively routine vote to meet America's obligations into a crisis threatening the world's economy. In response, the Reid plan met them 80% of the way by proposing $2.4 trillion in cuts, creating a process where a bipartisan commission could find a balanced approach to deficit reductions that would go beyond that and that would meet the American people's call for shared sacrifice from those who have not only the greatest wealth in the country, but also those who seem to have the privilege and the power to fashion the tax code in a way that benefits them but doesn't benefit working-class families in our country. No, but that wasn't enough for the Tea Party, nor for the party they now control. No, instead they have insisted on a process where oil companies, billionaires, offshore tax havens, and the corporate elite are completely protected from making shared sacrifices. That is simply not fair, and I cannot support it. The thought that because our soldiers will join seniors, students, and working-class families on the chopping block, that Democrats should flock to this plan is wrong-headed. Eliminating troubled DoD weapon systems is one thing, but across-the-board cuts will punish those who are bravely serving our country in a time of war. Adding these cuts just makes what was a painful plan a totally unfair, unbalanced, and unacceptable plan. I supported the Majority Leader's plan. I have shown I am serious about deficit reduction. I have supported a fair deal as described by people in New Jersey and across our country, a reasonable deficit reduction plan that truly represents compromise, a deal that fulfills the common sense idea of shared sacrifice. I know shared sacrifice, Mr. President. This is not shared sacrifice. This is capitulation to a radical fringe of the Republican Party that will not bend until they break this economy or get their own way. I have been for deficit reduction. I have voted for fair approaches to deficit reduction. I know fairness, but this deal, Mr. President, is not fair, and I will not support it. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor. Sir.